My name is Jake Ward. I'm a technology correspondent for NBC News. I'm based here in the Bay Area. I felt like an odd choice for this gathering because most of my work has to do with covering places in which AI is either sort of blowing up someone's career or de-skilling human beings or in some way causing controversy. And one of the reasons that I agreed to be here was that so much of what the applications are that we've heard about today have to do with this much more fundamentally useful, I think, application of this stuff that I think has a great deal, or at least can have a great deal less controversy to it. For me, I put AI into these sort of buckets of problematic because it's either de-skilling people or not actually solving a problem, unless the problem is we have too many creative screenwriters and we need to just blow them away and replace them with large language models. But then in the good category, and I write about this in a book I wrote called The Loop, there are these really interesting, smart, clear applications of pattern recognition systems, what people are generically calling AI, that I think really can make a tremendous difference and are, in fact, making either arming people with information that they would never have otherwise or allowing a single person to do the work of many in a place where they've really been orphaned in the past, as opposed to the paradigm we're seeing coming out of Hollywood and so many places where people simply just want to save costs as much as possible. So our panel today, I think, is really interesting. And I've observed and in some cases met these people before in my job because they are so interesting in this. So maybe we'll just sort of go down the line here a little bit. And Kate, you could tell us a little bit about you and I were speaking beforehand about the degree to which, I come to you naively in my sort of journalistic way and I say, well, is there something in providing a data stream to farmers across Africa that will take away their ability to understand with their eyes and their senses and their experience how to work the land and what to see about it? And she blew me up immediately and was, very politely so, but you corrected me immediately and I think very intelligently about that. So tell us a little bit about sort of what it is about applying machine learning to and data to farming in that continent that you think can be so transformative.
Sure. I think for me it's going back to basics and looking at machine learning and AI as a tool, as an end, and not as an end, but as a mean to an end, right? It's a tool that's here to improve your productivity, improve your profit. So if you go with that mindset and you build technology or solutions that are using this just as an amplifier, avoiding over-reliance on that tool, then you win. What we've been doing, us at Amini, and yes, we're collecting data, we're providing that to the businesses, but for us it was important as well to find a way to provide that data and deliver that data also to farmers because ultimately, it's about transforming those relationships, bringing data brings transparency, which brings trust, which transforms the entire value chain. And for us, the moment you get access to information, that is knowledge. You're able to improve how you're interacting day to day with your jobs. So when we built the company, we decided that we would deliver that information to farmers in a way that's free, in a way that's accessible, and packaged it in a way that they could understand it. So all of a sudden, farmers have access to insights on their farms that they didn't have before.
And what is the contrast for us, what it is to operate without that kind of insight, and then with that kind of, how transformative is it for someone working a couple hundred acres with absolutely no data insight whatsoever? Yeah. What can they do with some insight that you provide?
We were in the north of Kenya a couple of months ago working with a farmer on his farm and showing him our platform and the insights on his farm. And when you ask them, how are you getting weather forecast? He points to the mountain and he says, this is my weather forecast. Wow. And we're like, is it accurate? He's like, well, sometimes it's not. Because it's cloudy, I think it's gonna rain, it's actually not raining. So that's what he has access to, what he had access to. And now you're able to provide them with forecast on the weather, you're able to provide them with crop health, soil health, understanding if their crops is too water stressed, and they're able to adjust their practices. And adjust their practices allows them to increase their productivity and increase their profits, but then you push it one step further where These farmers don't have access to insurance. I spoke this morning about our technology being used in insurance. Only 20% or less than 20% actually of these farmers have access to any kind of insurance. So if there is a big flood, if there is big rainfall, the entire yield is lost. It's gone away, right? There is nothing they can turn back as a backup solution. So for them, it's their livelihood. Now you're able to support them understanding the weather pattern, understanding how climate change can affect them or what's going to happen within the next 2 weeks, and it's supporting them build resilience. Resilience thanks to the information, resilience thanks to the data. And there was an interesting study that looked at the suicidal rates in farmers. And it becomes really high, or it accelerates. It's accelerated with climate change because of the lack of insurance, of the lack of resilience. So getting access to that data, getting access to better services that are designed for them based on this data is critical. It's a life or death situation.
And for you, when we think about responsible AI in the context of what you are doing,
Yeah.
is there a sort of a no-go version of what you might do? You know, I'm just thinking about, you know, right now your customers, as I understand it, are the companies that would pay for that data, an insurer, someone who needs to prove to the SEC or someone else that they have good, you know, good that they're sourcing things responsibly and are pushing towards renewability. For you, what would be an unethical application of what you're trying to do? Like, how are you staying within the guardrails that you think of when you think about responsible AI?
When you look at a lot of space tech and geospatial companies, a lot of them have started wanting to do good, but then they realized that they actually could only sell to defense, intelligence agencies.
Right.
For us, that's the no-go. For us, we're building with the African problem in mind. We're not deploying a constellation just to deploy a constellation and then figuring out a business model, right? As a matter of fact, we started with the software, we started with the data platform, we started with the insights on the ground that we could bring to really solve that problem that's African. We're not building a space/AI company to sell data to Ministry of Defense or intelligence agency. That would be my no-go.
And for you, does that mean leaving some money on the table, some potential money on the table? Yes.
Oh yeah. Space tech companies become unicorns by selling to governments because these are 10-year contracts, multi-million dollars, and it's not profiting from that side. But that's how we maintain our impact, our drive, and our mission, because our mission is for the people, and that's what's drives us.
Yeah, that's great. Alessya, am I saying it right, Alessya? So, when I look at what Y Labs offers companies, you know, it's, as I understand it, insight, the ability to see a place where your models might be drifting away from their purpose, or a way in which bias has seeped in such a way that might be sort of perverting the output that you would want. And I think to this episode I had to cover during the pandemic where basically the California state authorities that were giving out the pandemic relief funds were embarrassed when it turned out that people were scamming that system. And a number of people, including Scott, help me out, somebody who killed his wife, and he's in prison now. What's his name? Well, anyway, that guy. He was one of them, and all of these people were getting scam checks because the California authorities were not ready for this, basically. So they then contracted out to Thomson Reuters, who builds a program that, you know, a machine learning system that, or claims to be a machine learning system that would basically review applications for possible inauthenticity. And they began spiking 7 out of 10 applications as false. And there's no way that 70% of these claims were false, right? And so a huge number of people were being falsely accused of applying wrongfully for these benefits and being denied. But on the face of it, that actually solves the California state authorities' problem in that they had a person power problem. They didn't want to have to process as many applications as they did. They didn't have the personnel to do it. And I wonder how often you bump into a situation in which what you are offering bumps up against what they, in theory, would want out of a black box system that they can just slap on that and say, okay, we've done the job.
Wow.
Is this
that's a loaded question, and it also involves murder, and I'm glad they got to jail, right? You know, I think everything we do, especially around automation, is always like a pendulum. It swings in one direction, and we want to achieve as much automation as possible because that's where we get efficiencies. But there are extremes, right? So I think, and you know, the other side of the extreme of this particular pendulum is there's no automation, and then, you know, we're too lazy to have oversight because it's going to involve a lot of humans, and it's going to become very expensive, so we're not going to have any oversight. And then we go on the other side, which is what Thomson Reuters did. We are going to automate and have this model that's going to do oversight. We're going to be super hands-off, and that's, again, like another extreme. And I think it's all about being balanced, right? And, you know, fundamentally, especially when I talk to journalists, there is this discussion about, you know, is AI or going to replace humans and take over everybody's jobs, and, you know, then we're just basically sitting on the couch and getting universal basic income or something.
Right.
I think what's important here, and I love Kate's example, and I mean, here's the role model company and how I see it. AI is augmenting people. It's augmenting how effective we could be in decision making. And it's empowering us with the information that would help us make a better decision or help us make a decision faster. So that's kind of key, and when anybody thinks about AI adoption, the technology is magical, but it's nowhere at the point where you can just replace everyone with it. There's actually not a single job that you can just replace. Because when you, for example, automate something, and we've seen examples at like AI-enabled factories, right? Well, when you bring this piece of automation, then the human who was doing this before becomes the person who is A, the expert, and B, as the oversight. So I think kind of keeping that balance in mind, both as practitioners who are building this technology and putting this technology out there, and consumers. I think it's on us, on consumers of this technology, in the end of the day, to disagree and push back and be informed that nobody's getting replaced, that there has to be balance and control.
Yeah. Do you find in your discussions with clients and potential clients that the thing that, like, I'm so curious, what is pulling them toward adopting your system? In my world, I would think, well, of course these companies would want as much insight into what these systems are getting wrong as they would about the places in which it's getting things right. Like, of course they would want that kind of insight. But then I speak to people who, you know, once upon a time there was this, I can't remember who did this study, but a few years ago there was a study out that said, like, it was something like 70% of the C-level executives asked about the ML systems that they had applied at their companies literally had no idea how they worked. And what's more, I think it was a higher percentage of them did not care. And they were sort of standing behind this kind of willful ignorance that felt to me like, oh wow, you know, like, what's going to pull them into showing some real curiosity about this and trying to correct when things go wrong? For you, how are you finding, you know, what brings people to you? Why do they come to you for the insight you provide?
Kate, I'm going to put you, I'm going to involve you here in this answer again. Thank you for being here. It's making it easy for me. Okay, so first of all, insight, great. Let's face it, most of the people don't care. That's a good intention, right? And, you know, Kate says, I care to provide this insight, not to the defense agencies, but to the farmers, because I care about the farmers, I care about the humans. And that's great. She's an extreme outlier. As you know, we have seen the majority of such companies serve a very different purpose than what she's trying to build. And in the capitalistic world, you know, impact and insight is something you kind of care about in a secondary way. In the end of the day, we care about money. And in majority of cases, when we are working with customers, they identified that they put forward this, I don't know, let's say an AI-enabled device that does object detection, which I brought up in my talk. And they were anticipating that it's going to drive optimization of the humans in the hospital. It's going to make operators of devices much faster. Let's say it's like an ultrasound device, and suddenly the operator of this device can go through more patients and provide a more accurate outcome, and generate kind of better results for this hospital. And they have this technology out there, and they're not seeing those results. And effectively, I mean, Insight is great, but they're really losing money. So I think in the end of the day, it's good to have good intentions, but without control and observability, without us tracking and ensuring that this technology, it's just a super complex technology, right, is delivering the outcomes to the end users. And it really matters to think about the end users, who is being directly affected, and are they happy or not? Because if they're not happy, they're going to leave, and that again is going to affect the money situation, which is what everybody cares about.
Right. And do you find that are you optimistic about the potential for not just playing cleanup on an application of this stuff that was applied wrong and produced the results that they didn't mean to, and being able to get into a place where observability is part of the product from the very beginning, that people feel they would want that from the beginning? Are you optimistic about us heading that way?
We're off the hype cycle.
Yeah, right.
Absolutely. In fact, so when we were getting started at Y Labs, which was 2019, I came from Amazon, where we learned through a lot of mistakes what doesn't work, and I kind of emerged in the ecosystem outside of this big company like Amazon, and started preaching this idea of observability, control, and how useful it is. And everybody was like, I don't know, sounds good, but why does it matter? Right now, I have very different goals. And it took a while. So initially, I think a lot of our customers were people who had good intentions, who were like, okay, well, I have this system, I'm investing a lot of money into it, I would like to make sure that it's not going to create PR disasters. I've heard about some PR disasters and I want to avoid them, so I would like to ensure that we have the right controls in place and observability. But today, it's pretty widely accepted, especially across enterprises who have been using AI for a while and who have been operating AI in production. And I think kind of my personal moment of bragging is this year CB Insights published the big landscape of Gen AI companies, and observability is right there as like the very definitive category of software that we need in the Gen AI space, which is very important. So I think the attitude and the realization of how important this is, and how much money you'll be losing, and how unsuccessful the projects would be if you don't have the right control in place, is there. And we are much further along than where we were 4 years ago.
It reminds me, I had a period of time where I worked in architecture journalism, and there was a long time where there was this little subset of architects who were known for green architecture, and that was like a selling point of their thing, and they were this weird little hippie group. And now suddenly, and then a few years later, suddenly it was totally unacceptable to practice architecture in any form without considering that stuff. I don't know, maybe we're moving that way.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of similarities. And this, this is happening to our community, to the AI community, but this has happened many times, right? Observability was introduced in manufacturing and general software development. So it's a pattern that we're implementing and kind of building best practices around specifically for AI, but it's not new and novel in any way.
Yeah. So Pete, you did 7 years at Google. You worked on the TensorFlow, project. You were technical lead there. And then when I've been following your career, and when I read then your blog post about coming out publicly with useful sensors and how you were going to do it, I remember you saying early on, you talked about, you were describing what you were going to do, and then you were like, I want a on-off switch with some facial recognition and this, that, and the other. And I was like, wow, there's some loaded stuff. Like, he's at the crossroads of some really loaded stuff. But I also know, based on, it's right up top when you describe the company, the values you're trying to bring to it, and you have certain values, and I'm just curious, like, give me some sense of that, right? You're trying to create what, you're trying to create the kind of devices that I think if it had an NSA logo on it, people would like throw that thing in the garbage, right? Throw it in the bathtub. But you're also, I know somebody who thinks very deeply about this stuff. So tell me how you're navigating this, like things where you're really going to get into people's lives, but you're trying to do it with values.
So one of the big things I found when I was at Google working on a lot of this stuff was friends and family would often say, hey, Pete, I was just talking about Tunisia with a friend, and I started getting all these ads for holidays in Tunisia. Like, what the hell, Pete? Are you spying on me? And I was able to say, sort of, hand on my heart, no. I work on that code, but I can't prove it. So a big part of what I left Google to do was try and build systems where you can actually have third parties check what data is being shared in a very provable way, and actually have nutrition labels, essentially. Like CMU have been doing some great work on this, where you actually buy something and it tells you, okay, this is what is going to be shared. Obviously there's lots of dangers with that. It becomes like a privacy policy where it just says, hey, we're going to share everything with everyone. So it's not perfect. But really trying to, what I realized is that I don't want to be making these kinds of decisions. I'm a big believer in democracy and regulation, and democracy needs a well-informed public, which is, where journalism and also just letting people get their hands on these things and understand how they work, and then actually make informed choices at the ballot box and all kinds of different levels of policy and legislation and law to constrain and decide, instead of having, just some random engineer who happens to be in the right place at the particular time saying, oh, this is what I think we should do. If we can actually involve people, the wider public, in making these decisions, that's really what I'm sort of, shooting for with this stuff. It's putting this stuff out there and saying, hey, do you want a TV in your, do you want a camera in your TV in your bedroom? Probably not. Okay, how about an image sensor that has been checked to make sure that it cannot ever be hacked and can't transmit the image? I don't know the answer to that. I don't want to be the one making that decision. It kind of depends on what the benefits are. But, I know this is long, but just to finish this up, the thing that also struck me is I think 78% of Americans in a survey think that their voice assistants are spying on them. But 40-something% of people still use them.
Right.
So anyway, I
remember I spoke to a higher up in advertising at Facebook who was saying, oh yeah, our number one and number two most requested things is don't spy on me, but serve me really personalized ads. And he chuckled away, and I thought, I'm not sure that's funny, but okay, but that's right, there's this cognitive dissonance to how people are engaging with this stuff. Do you think that for people engaging, if you make it the sales proposition of useful sensors, that this is a closed off system, it's not connected to the internet, or that it's built with your privacy in mind, that all that stuff. Do you find that is, are you able to articulate that to people, and do you think there's some resonance there, or do you have to swim upstream against this world in which people are turning over their whole lives to companies for the most part?
So honestly, I'm a little bit cynical. I really don't think that, as given with the voice assistant example, the fact that there's this widespread belief that big tech companies are spying on people, but people are still using them. I think if there's something that offers value to people, they will take it. So I think that is our responsibility as engineers, is to build systems that are going to cause the least amount of harm, privacy side, even if that's not a selling proposition. We've got lots of other selling propositions, like it's offline, so as soon as you plug it in, it starts working. You don't have to do network setup, and there's all of this other stuff that we do see getting traction with consumers, but I almost feel like the privacy is something, it's like, the Hippocratic Oath or something, first do no harm as engineers, like don't build systems that open up the door to spying and hacking. Like, even if you'll make money by doing that, like, just please, dear God, don't do it. Like.
So in a weird way, you need to sort of hang on to values that people may not be able to articulate for themselves, but that are important for society as a whole. Like the people who make the products, in a way, have to offer more than they're asked in that place.
Yeah, so in a weird way, like, I don't want us making the decisions, but I do think that we have a responsibility to kind of, even if there's no monetary incentive to do this, we have to just, as human beings in this society, like, really do the best we can to protect people.
Let me ask each of you, the three of you are all three, you all did time inside some of the biggest companies in this space, right? NVIDIA, Amazon, Google. I mean, you guys have all had long careers playing in the very biggest companies in this world. And I'm wondering if, I think one of the themes of the products that we're seeing out of Edge Impulse and that so many people are talking about today, right, is that this is technology that makes it possible for somebody to do a company that once upon a time would need a whole ML team to accomplish, and now in theory you don't need that, right? So do you think there's something inherent to breaking away and doing your own project that is necessary in order to observe the kinds of values that you guys obviously are trying to? And are you optimistic that as more and more people break away and operate at this scale, they will embody better and better values? Or are the three of you the outliers in a big landscape? I don't know, Kate, do you have any thoughts about that? I'm
kind of an eternal optimistic.
Yeah.
So the people who know me in this room know that I laugh a lot, and I always have a lot of hopes. And actually, it's a conversation I was having with Zach yesterday during our little sit-down interview. When you look at all the triggers throughout a career, starting at Intel, working on Edge AI for a very long time, and then ARM, understanding how to impact people's relationship with technology, and then NVIDIA, big giant, you're trying to drive something. There's always something that motivates us personally. Me is my ties with Africa, and then my willingness to impact people and move Africa from surviving into thriving. And I've tried on that other side, right? But what you realize is that you always work for something, for a company that's bigger than you and has other priorities than yours. So the change becomes difficult to make. There's this sentence that says, be the change you want to make, right? So at some point, there's another trigger that tells you, well, now you've probably reached your limits. You will have a much better impact outside. And as a matter of fact, you get out of this world and you start building something that you truly believe in, that you try to drive where you want it to head, but you realize that you have much more ties and also influence onto the other side. So, we're still working, as a company, we're working with NVIDIA. As a matter of fact, we just opened a small climate lab in our offices in Nairobi, right? They gifted us a bunch of GPUs. We're working on advanced climate modeling with their platforms. They're supporting us. So all of a sudden, you become the trusted node in a place that they had no idea about. When I was there, I was trying to drive a lot of the expansion into Africa, get them to care about African developers, but it was something that was a little bit unknown for them, so they were very shy. And all of a sudden, they're like, oh, here you go. She used to be one of us. So she understands, we know her, here are tools that you can use and work together. So I feel like I'm very hopeful that right now I feel we're at the right time where there is this enormous interest in AI. The ecosystem on big tech is still there. People are starting to see startups doing good and sometimes bad in AI, sprouting. And I hope it's going to encourage a new generation of founders to actually break away from big tech and go and do that change.
And do you feel that in the trajectory of how that might go, in the narrative arc of it, are we at the best possible place for values-based company building, or will the conditions get better for that, do you think? Or is this as good as it's going to be in terms of values being something we talk about and also these tools being available?
I think we are at the best place we can be. The reason why there are a few things companies are scared of, and one of them is regulations. So right now, regulations are coming for big companies, FMCGs, food and beverage companies with supply chain on the continent. So there is this energy with supply chain across the world, and forcing them to disclose on their supply chain. And all of a sudden, everybody has to do good and has to be held accountable for doing good. So a lot of companies who didn't care before have to care. They're forced to care by regulators. And then at the same time, technology is sprouting. There's one word I haven't heard today, it's ChatGPT. And all the past conference for the past couple of months I've been to, everybody is talking about ChatGPT. But it shows you that right now, AI is at a point where it's become completely mainstream, and every single person outside of this room has heard about AI before, right? So you have that energy on that side as well. And when you start coupling both, you know that companies or startups that are building something for impact and to force others to do good now also have the benefit of being able to make profits. Back to what Alessya was doing, I mean, right now is the time to combine both good and technology and be able to make profit.
Yeah.
And investors are also turning to that because investors understand the regulatory landscape and also want to support startups that will be able to take advantage of this very special moment in time. And there's this big talk about climate. Right now, we're going right through a food scarcity, water scarcity. How do you actually counter this? We're also kind of in a battleground when it comes to climate, right? So I think for us, we're really at the right place at the right time to drive something that will have an impact on the people.
Yeah, Alessya, you were inside Amazon. You were mentioning, a sort of error correction was sort of its own, was one thing, and now you've built this whole company on the idea of doing that. Tell me about the contrast there, and how do you feel about independent companies like yours sprouting up in this landscape?
And first of all, when you asked the question originally, you said "did time," and it's like that phrase is still with me. I'm like, we all did time in these big companies.
Well, you were briefly incarcerated inside Amazon.
First of all, the one thing I want to say is I don't think any of these companies, these biggest companies, are like evil in any way. Just like Pete was saying, we all have this maybe misconception that there's so much spying going on, and in reality, every big company is solving and optimizing for a particular problem, and they're doing it in like a very massive way. So it's very hard for them to adjust and maybe to adapt to better practices, greener practices, and so on. But they're also are the enablers, right? Because the three of us are sitting here, we learned a lot of our ways, and we got inspired, and we got the means to do what we do today because we were in these big companies. And at YLabs, for instance, we are partnered with AWS. In fact, one of our investors is Bezos Expeditions. So even though I left Amazon and then poached 2 more people from there, I still got one of the first checks to do what I do from Jeff Bezos. And I think earlier today, Zach was mentioning that Edge Impulse is partnered with AWS as well, and they're in what's called an ISV Accelerate program, which is absolutely essential for small companies like ours to take off and to be able to serve our customers very effectively. So I think the way I look at kind of this dynamics between these giant companies and entrepreneurs is that it's a fully symbiotic relationship. And while they help us with certain resources, in case of AWS, like we co-sell with AWS, they give us a ton of compute credits, and I'm sure NVIDIA does the same thing for a lot of companies in the Gen AI space today. We, on the other hand, can innovate much faster and iterate much faster and bring ideas to life that otherwise wouldn't be possible. Like in Pete's case, right? If a big company puts something forward, like what useful sensors are doing, that wouldn't see adoption. So there is very much a symbiotic relationship.
Yeah, that's interesting. Pete, when I mean, what would have held you back? I mean, role play for me. Let's say if you pitch what you're doing now inside Google, I'm sure you probably did. What's that like, and what is the reaction? And again, here I'm just trying to get this idea of like the three of you to me are so interesting because you are taking advantage of these tool sets that allow a small independent company to do something really that would not have been possible even 10 years ago. Whether that is essential for the kind of values-based company building that the three of you are thinking about.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of parts to this. One of them is on-device speech, which is a lot of what we're doing, is a sort of classic innovator's dilemma thing for a company like Google, and I think also for Amazon to some extent as well, because they have built up this big centralized infrastructure around trying to drive voice traffic by saying like, okay, Google or Alexa, and then having it all go up to the centralized server, trying to get everybody into their sort of walled gardens where all of these devices are kind of part of this particular ecosystem. And the speech team, when I was there, was part of the assistant team. So the idea of saying, hey, I'd love to do this on-device voice stuff. Oh, and by the way, it may never connect to the network. That, from a business model point of view, is just like, why? Like, no, you don't understand. Because Google has incredibly good on-device voice stuff that they do on things like the Pixel and things. It just has never made sense to make it out into the world. I think talking to the bigger picture, the thing that I always get a bit worried by is when we start to focus on almost like the virtues of individuals around this sort of stuff, because I think every single company that has grown into a big tech company was usually started with very, noble intentions, Google's don't be evil, all of this sort of stuff, but the system that they're part of, the fact that there's a lot of these winner-take-all markets, and the fact that that tends to kind of dampen down competition, and all of these other factors that it doesn't matter how virtuous like individuals are in that, they're going to be shaped by the system to end up doing things that we as a society maybe say, hey, we don't want that. So that's why I'm so keen on regulation or other ways of actually evaluating, having the community evaluate behavior and try and set these limits, rather than us just trying really hard to be to not do something bad, because we're in the worst position to spot when we kind of go off the rails.
Yeah. So maybe just as a final thought here, for the three of you, and I hate to end on regulation, but I am so curious to know like what the, given how clearly and well-formed your values are and are built into the companies that you've built, I'm curious what you would want, if there were a general principle you could articulate it to a set of regulators who are thinking about it right now. I can't tell you just how many phone calls I get from people saying, who should I invite to tell me how to regulate this stuff? Like, we get a huge amount of that. I get asked that a lot. And I feel like each person showing up has their own 30-minute presentation they like to do, but I'm curious for you guys, if you think it's possible to crystallize some of what the three of you are describing, a no-go zone on selling to military contractors, the idea that people need to, even though they're maybe informed by capitalistic instincts, they can still do the right thing by their customers and by their data, and the idea that you shouldn't be spying on people, right? Like, can we encode that, do you think, into some regulations, into some guidelines that everybody could understand and abide by? This is a big question, everybody, so I don't know who wants to take it, but like, maybe we could go down the line, like if you could enshrine something in how we think about this stuff, what would you do?
It's gonna have to be to take an entire ecosystem to be able to get there, and I'm gonna talk about this from the perspective of specifically Africa and data.
Sure.
Right now, there's no real data regulatory landscape in Africa, right? Yet, if every country starts putting their own framework and closes cross-border flow of data, then all of a sudden Nigeria, the environmental data we collect in Nigeria can't go to Kenya, and, so it becomes a big issue that we really don't want to get into. So for us, I think on the continent, right now there is an opportunity. I see regulation as an opportunity because it's pretty much non-existent, but at the same time, the Africa AI and data landscape is accelerating a lot. So I would see that coming over the next couple of years as a framework that they put in place, probably highly likely, highly inspired from GDPR, but applied to the entire continent, and it's going to have to be all the 54 countries working together.
That's very interesting. Alessya, do you think there's a way to sort of encode observability and transparency, the kinds of values you're trying to build into?
Yeah, I mean, GDPR is one example, right? And that has been now widely adopted. I think the challenge with regulation in general is that we have seen it done wrong so many times that everybody has a lot of hesitations, like, oh my God, it's going to slow everything down. It's going to slow down innovation. And here I have to go back to kind of the very basic thing of that pendulum, that we have to think about the extremes and make sure that that's not where we end up. And we have to think about the first step in the process and what's the next step in the process is going to be. How can we improve and iterate? So there's a lot of hesitation about getting started with it, but until we get started, we can't get to any level of improvement. So I think it's getting together, bringing in the relevant practitioners into the room as the good place to start.
That's great. Pete, any thoughts about it?
I'd like to teach Joe Biden to code. It's a little facetious, but I would love to get more people who actually understand the legislative, the policy, the political side, like actually get them hands-on experience with this stuff, and make it so that it's not, again, I come back to this, but it's not just engineers. We're not trained. We don't know the whole context. We don't have these kinds of feedbacks and contact with the public making these decisions. Like, let's bring in as many stakeholders as possible and educate them and get them up to speed on the possibilities, and then kind of hopefully sit back a bit and actually have, fingers crossed, some half-decent legislation and regulation around this.
Well, may all of these values and these insights flow to us all. Thank you so much for, please thank our panelists, and thank you.